I recreated Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso and discovered a really important aspect that I want to cover in this video when it comes to using samples in your productions. So let me go ahead and show you the finished product, and then I'll walk you through sharing some music production techniques and tips along the way. Now, it might not seem like there's a lot going on in the instrumental of this track, but trust me, there are a lot of small, nuanced decisions that go into creating that pop sound that you could hear on the original record that I want to share with you. And a subscriber to this channel pointed out that the main riff that we can hear throughout the whole tune is based on a sample that can be found in Splice. So I want to talk about the ramifications of using samples, what to look out for, and how to best navigate those decisions when including melodic samples in your projects. But first, let's start by taking a look at the drums. Now, sound selection when it comes to drums is essential. I'd rather find the right sample that matches the right vibe and feel of the record I'm trying to do than trying to manipulate some random sample that I find to get it close to what I'm looking for. It's best that you invest that time and create a storehouse of samples that you normally will gravitate to in the genre of music you like creating, rather than just using any sounds and trying to morph them into what you're looking for. So, with that in mind, I've got a drum rack loaded in Ableton Live, and I've got a couple samples that I've selected from a sample pack that really capture a lot of the mood and energy of what we're trying to create. So let's focus on the pattern here. Now, a couple key things to keep in mind. Hey, we'll get right back to the video, but I just want to take this time to let you know that I have courses that walk you through songwriting, arranging, vocal production, sound designing, mixing, mastering, and everything in between that you can get access to right now for free. That's right. You can visit beatacademy.com/join and take advantage of all the resources that I have available for you there so that you can build confidence with the music that you're producing right now. It's free. So click the link below in the description box or visit beatacademy.com/join. Okay, let's get back to the video. First, I want to direct your attention to the hi-hat. What I'm making sure to do is to create a more realistic vibe and feedback from the hi-hat by having one main accent hi-hat and a lower velocity hi-hat. As you can see here, if I hold my command key over that, the velocity is set, the value is set to 54. So it's going to be lower in volume. And as you're adjusting that parameter in the sample, it's best that you make sure that the velocity setting, the velocity to volume ratio is set anywhere. If you have it at 0, it won't have any effect. So it doesn't matter where you set it. The stronger the number value, the more drastic your changes to velocity will affect the overall volume for that sample. So I'll leave it here at 45. And if I go back to here in my drum rack and the actual pattern, I can adjust the velocity by holding command, clicking on the sample, and dragging up or dragging down. Now, what this is going to do, it's going to give a more realistic approach to the hi-hat performance, making the second hi-hat a little bit softer in volume and the next hi-hat a lot louder, accenting that hi-hat. And for the most part, the kick and snare pattern is pretty straightforward. But what I wanted to do was layer this one sound on here, which is the clap. As you can see here, I've grabbed all the clap, the whole row of the clap, and I've slightly nudged them. So if I hold the command key, I can nudge them away, and making them just a hair late gives a nice little flam effect that gives a little bit more width to that disco snare clap thing that we often hear in records like this. Now, as I mentioned about sound selection, if I go to the clap, I have a couple actual two sounds layered together. And the way I accomplish this is, let's just say this is a snare here. I would go ahead and hit Command G or right click and choose to group. And then that gives me the opportunity inside Ableton Live to simply layer that one sound inside that one cell of the drum rack with multiple sounds. So here we have a clap and a snare mixed together. But what I'm doing is that I'm actually taking the snare drum and I'm using the filter frequency to just carve out everything on the low, mid, and lows so that we get just more of this, just more of the mid range of that snare drum. Here's the reason why: is with the clap alone, I get the nice width of that clap. That's this sample here. But then adding the snare drum here, it's adding some bit of that noise in that space that really helps create a lot more dimension. And this is what I was talking about earlier. All these small little decisions, these nuances, that's what makes these those records that we enjoy on the radio or that are just charting. All these, nuances go into the decision making. So now if I listen to the drum rack alone, and then I'm layering that drum beat, which is what I would call my foreground beat, kick, clap, snare, and hi-hat, with a drum loop playing the same pattern. And I'm using a compressor first, but I'm using sidechaining, and I'm not using the kick to sidechain. I actually want the snare drum from my drum rack to sidechain this drum loop. Essentially, I want my snare and clap combo that I layered and crafted together to be the main event here. So by sidechaining, meaning enabling the sidechain, choosing the drum rack, and then choosing the actual snare to be the main source of my sidechain, that's going to allow this snare drum here to kind of duck out of the way, so to speak, and then allow my main snare to have more of the spotlight. And so the purpose of this drum loop, I'm not just throwing loops just to throw it. I oftentimes love doing this because the nuance or the space and the air and just all the atmosphere that the loop has layered on top of my main beat gives that extra layer of texture that I'm oftentimes missing when I'm just programming my drums separately. Giving it some nice distortion with the overdrive and taking the EQ to carve out all the low end here. So let's put that together with the drum rack. Now I'll solo out the loop so you can hear the difference. Should be subtle, but it creates the feel and the texture that I'm looking for. And then another thing that I'm doing is I'm having a shaker loop here, tucked really, really far back as volume-wise. And this just creates a nice little movement between the gaps of our subdivisions here. And with the shaker, I'm using a side chain, but this time from the kick. So every time the kick is heard, the shaker ducks. And all of these things put together is what creates that nice push and pull vibe and groove with the drums that if I didn't have it, it would just be a really stiff, robotic groove. So this gives a little bit of more of that dance, that push and pull, to give some pocket for the bass to do its thing. So I have all these items running into a drum bus, and I'm using the glue compressor from Ableton Live to just really bridge the gap or bring the distance between the kick and that snare group, and just bring them a little bit closer so it feels more of a cohesive, unified chunk of drums. It also helps bring all the little noise in between the kick and snare a little bit higher. And I'm using the Universal Audio's analog machines, the Verbs. I was actually just trying it out, but I'm using this to give it some nice warmth and vintage, vibe. So we'll take this off. Nice, bright, and brittle. Put this here. Nice and warm. And then just an EQ as I'm starting to add the other elements to give it context and tonal balance with all the other instruments. So I won't be EQing this for the sake of just EQ sake. I want to make sure that as I start adding the bass, the other instruments in there, that if I needed a little bit more bottom end from the drums, I could do that with the EQ. So let's just bypass these. Now, before we move to the bass, I want to talk about the main riff. This is a guitar and pad riff that we can hear, which is taken from a sample pack in Splice created by the sample pack creator Oliver. I think the actual file is Oliver 104 Pop Loop. So let's take a listen to that. Ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And what I want to talk a little bit about this is not the notion of like, this isn't cheating whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I think this is a smart move on the producer and songwriters are just putting this together because if it inspired and if it was the means or the seed that was planted in the soil of creativity that blossomed into the song of and made it what it is, then it's fair game. And whether you believe, oh, that sample riff, that's cheating, I don't think that's really the argument or the conversation that really should be at the center stage. I think the conversation is, what do you do when you navigate in the situation of, okay, now how does it work? So and so used that sample and they made a huge record, it's blowing up, it's on radio and worldwide, and I happen to use that same sample. Well, that's where the tension really is. You see, samples like this can easily be identifiable to the general public. So it really all comes down to who makes it across the finish line first. So in this case, the producers and writers of Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter used it, didn't really change it. I actually dragged and dropped it directly, didn't do any altercations to it as far as key or chopping it up or changing the rhythm, but just dragged and dropped it and wrote a great song on top of it, meaning that they're first in line. And so anybody else planning to use that same sample, you're kind of left in the dust, so to speak. And so when it comes to the mindset of, well, how do I navigate using melodic samples like that? I say, if you want to create somewhat of a personal edge when incorporating them, think about clever, creative ways that you can manipulate those samples that give it its own original, unique approach rather than just dragging and dropping it, because you don't necessarily know who has access to that same sample and who's already made a claim to a song with that, if that sample's at the main center stage of the song, such as this one right here. So my personal advice is, I'm not saying don't use samples. As a matter of fact, I encourage, especially those who are just getting started with producing music, to use samples. It's a great way to alleviate and remove the burden of trying to have to learn how to record the guitar, get it sounding just like that and all the things that come with it. But instead, think a little bit outside the box creatively and how you can make the samples your own, unique, and maybe not necessarily have the whole song dependent on that sample. And it could be very much featured. And this goes not just for samples on Splice or other sample packs, but even reoccurring subscription plugins such as Arcade from Output, things like that. So keep that in mind when using samples. So using that sample, doing nothing but actually just using an EQ to take some of the low end away and warming it up with a filter. I can also use the EQ to do the same thing too. So just wanted to show you both ways to get that done. Now, what I've also did was duplicated the whole track here, which gives me this track here with the same exact sample, but I'm going to pitch this sample a whole octave higher. So I went here, double clicked it, 12 semitones, and switched it from beats to complex mode to give it this type of effect. And the purpose for me doing this is so that I'm adding another layer of texture that I can oftentimes hear in the original record. And this is just a great production technique as well to give some atmospheric texture right alongside a main riff that you might have. So I'm adding and I'm purposely inserting some effects such as delay and a reverb to create the atmosphere and space. So when I put these together, this is without the octave. This is with it. So it creates that nice glaze of atmosphere since it's being played a whole octave up, and it's just a really cool texture to have. And as you can see, I'm lowering it down here, so it's not in the spotlight, but it's mostly just kind of giving it the texture that I want. So let's start by focusing in on the bass. So for the bass line, I'm actually starting with Ableton Live's wavetable. So let me go ahead and solo the bass. Now, when I was listening to the original, I was like, okay, yeah, sounds like let me start with, and my natural instinct was to start with an electric bass. I was going to use IK Multimedia's Moto bass, and I still have it. I'll get to in a second. But yet it had a nice, deeper, subbier, blubbery type of bass to it. So I figured, well, let me start with using the wavetable. Now, you can follow along, even if you're not using Ableton Live. You can use any oscillator, any synth that might have one or two oscillators or more. So the first oscillator is going to get set to a sawtooth. That's where really a lot of that rubbery type of sound or texture and tone comes from. The second oscillator is going to set to a sine wave. That's where a lot of the bottom and subby attribute of the sound is going to come from. So that's what we have here. And I'm going to bring the cutoff frequency all the way down. And what's really important is that I map the cutoff frequency to my envelope 2. So you can see that I'm sending it over to 30 here. And envelope 2, I want to bring the sustain all the way down and keep a nice short decay. Gives it that nice bouncy, plucky type of sound, and then bring the frequency down a little bit. And so giving it some filter drive. And what's important is that you make sure that your polyphonic is set over to mono, like the voicing of your bass. You don't want the notes to linger and overlap. So we've got that set to mono. Now I've taken that same bass line, hold Alt, and just copied that right over to my another track here, which is going to be IK Multimedia's Moto bass. And I'm going with the 70s P bass. Just like the tone of it, I made sure to put the muting up a little bit, and under the electronics, I'm turning the tone knob about halfway. Now the purpose of this is that when I layer that with the bass, there's a unique, it's just adding a unique texture to that subby layer that I wouldn't get if it was just the bass from the wavetable alone. And I'm adding a little bit of distortion to the Moto bass to give it some presence, and just eliminating the low end so the bottom wavetable bass takes over. And so, yeah, let's check this out with the rest of the groove. And now let's focus our attention on the cool bells that we can hear as a response throughout the chorus here. So let me play that part for you. So what we have here is an Ableton Live wavetable. I've got two oscillators, one set to a sine wave and one set to a triangle. And you can experiment with either of the waveforms, but this is what's going to give that nice bell type of tone, because when we play it at a higher octave, usually when we think of sine wave, we think basses, but go a couple octaves higher and you get a really cool bell tone. So I'm going to go ahead and set the unison on. So I get that nice stereo with unison for the sound, and then insert a reverb directly on there and really give it some nice dimension and space. So 60%, 62% dry and wet, you can experiment with that. And then a little bit more chorus here. That's what creates a lot of the atmosphere of the sound. If I took this off, we put this back on, and that just fits really nicely as a cool call and response moment. Well, I hope this video was helpful, encouraging, and inspiring in any way, and that you picked up a tip or two that you can use in your music production. And so as my gift to you for watching, I'd love to invite you to become a Beat Academy member, where you'll have access to courses, community, and workshops that help you elevate your music production skill set and build confidence in the music that you're passionate about making. And the best part is, it's free. Just click the link below in the description box or visit beatacademy.com/join to access all the resources that I've put together to really help you take your next step forward with producing your own music. So, can't wait for you to see you inside Beat Academy. click the link below or visit beatacademy.com/join to get access today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date with upcoming videos. And let me know in the comment section what you would like to see more of as far as video goes and content goes on this channel. Take care, and I'll see you next time.